Good day and welcome to this Focus On Special with me, Dewald Rademeyer. We are here at the U.S-Africa Business Summit in Gaborone, Botswana, speaking to heads of states, government officials and investors and also key industry players to talk about the opportunities in strengthening the economic ties in the two regions. In today's episode, we'll be speaking to Farouk Gumel, who is the Group Executive Director for Tropical Investment General Group, about where Africa's manufacturing sector lies within the value chain.
Yes, we had a conversation this morning, very enlightened discussions around what impacts the Africa value chain when it comes to manufacturing. And I think for me, the biggest area that we need to focus on is manpower. Because most people think of manufacturing as a machine, as raw materials, equipment, but the people to run those machines, the people that we need to ensure that the output is of quality, and the people that actually transport that, brand and market it, is a huge need in Africa. And so as a group, we spend a lot of time trying to invest in that human capital development. We have training academies, we have apprenticeship programs, etc., that brings people in and turns them from artisanal workers to experts in those particular fields. And I think that is the future of growth in Africa industrialization. Whatever you want to produce, you need the right people to be behind those machines, and that's where we need to continue to invest in to ensure that any growth that we have is inclusive.
So you're saying we should look more at human capital as opposed to AI in this particular matter?
That's my view, because we cannot leapfrog reality. Yes, AI is very important to bring efficiencies into existing operations, but where you don't have those operations perfected on the continent, the first thing you need to do is to ensure that you do it the right way, and then you now do it in a more enhanced manner. So my view is, yes, as we move and we move with technology, we don't want to be left behind. But if you want to create that inclusive economy where everybody becomes prosperous, or at least the majority becomes prosperous, you have to capture man. You have to get people involved. Manpower is critical for Africa's peace and stability. If we just have a very urban-based, tech-driven environment, that leaves the majority of people in the rural environments outside this economy. So economic development has to be inclusive.
But now, where does our manufacturing sector lie in the greater scheme of things? Because Africa mainly imports and not exports. I mean, we've seen the effects of the Russia-Ukraine war impacting grain, impacting fertilizer. So where does our manufacturing sector lie within a greater scheme, in a greater value chain?
Well, I think if we take the issue of fertilizer, for example, you'll find that in my country, in Nigeria, for example, we have a lot of urea producers and we have over 70 blending plants in the country. So when you have the raw materials, there are certain countries that are of scale enough to produce locally for local consumption. Now, what we need to do as a continent is to sit down and say, what are the key raw materials we have that are needed within the continent? Those that we don't have, where do we source it so that we can have that handshake between domestic, locally available raw materials and imported value-add materials to do value addition locally. So my view is there's a lot we can do, but we have to look in-house. And the first step is to understand what is this informal sector that drives most of our continent. There's a lot of data on urban formal economy, but I think we still lack a lot of information on that rural informal economy. And if you want to manufacture for Africa, for consumption by Africans, you cannot ignore that informal economy.
So how do we bring the formal economy in?
I think we have to study it a bit more. As a business, most of our factories are not located in cities. We have a lot of operations outside in those rural areas, and gradually we're working with partners, development partners, government partners, etc., to see how we can convert this raw data from this experimentation into an implementable, expandable program that will capture the majority.
Have you seen any positive effects from the Africa Continental Free Trade Area?
I think obviously the positives are there, but the implementation is still ongoing. So that is a medium to long-term initiative in terms of the impact it has. And I always say that in the informal sector, there is free trade. The question is whether that free trade is fair, because the items that move may not be formally produced. That means you'll have a country that is on the port side and you have another country that is landlocked The country that is on the coastal side will have a definite advantage over that country that is landlocked, which may likely have the capacity to produce. But because those imported items are done in a more efficient, cheaper manner, they become competitive compared to what is locally produced. So what the Continental Free Trade Agreement needs to do is to study that informal sector, understand it, and see how we can enhance and formalize it so that free trade in Africa becomes fair.
Thank you for taking time to talk to me. You were just on a panel discussing the pharmaceutical sector in Africa and how it fits into the global value chain. What is it that your company are doing to help facilitating this?
So thank you very much for inviting me, Zwelethu. I think it's important to first state that we are invested in pharmaceutical manufacturing on the continent. We've got a manufacturing facility out in Midrand. Beyond that, we invest quite a lot in terms of research and development. I think 2021, we invested about $12 billion globally in R&D. My research team back in South Africa is bigger than my commercial team. And our African research operations is one of the top 5 contributors into our research ecosystem within MSD. So I think from an R&D and manufacturing perspective, we are doing a lot, but there is scope for growth. But before that happens, there are some sort of value chain issues that need to be discussed that we spoke about on the panel. Number one, I think the continent as a whole needs to be clear on what it needs to manufacture and where. I travel extensively on the continent, and in each country that I go to, the policymakers within those countries are calling for me to invest in local manufacturing. Unfortunately, that doesn't help because you do need economies of scale to make manufacturing operations efficient. The second thing, you do need regulatory and policy harmonization to ensure that one dossier for one product can be registered simultaneously across multiple African markets. At the moment, each country has its own regulatory process, and the AFCFTA is doing a lot of work to build this regulatory harmonization, but I think that we can expedite that work.
How? How is the AFCFTA helping with this regulation?
So they're building, working with the country regulatory bodies, so such as SAPRA that we have in South Africa, to build expertise. I believe Rwanda is built to be sort of the Africa sort of regulatory body headquarters, and through getting regulatory approval in that body, you would get expedited approval in all the signatory countries, which helps us an incredible amount because it builds speed and efficiency in our route to market process as an innovative manufacturer.
What barriers would you say exist within the borders of Africa that's limiting this process?
I think the biggest barrier relates to our ability to aggregate volumes. We currently don't have tangible pooled procurement mechanisms on the continent. And so me as an organization, we have to have 55 different countries, conversations in order to sort of build a market within Africa. And that's a real challenge. So if we were to be able to get to a point where we can actively tap into the benefits of pooled procurement as a continent, I think the conversation would be different. I shocked Minister Godin in the discussion earlier today when I said Africa's not yet a market of 1.3 billion people. We're a continent with 1.3 billion people, but we're not yet a market because a market operates in a unified way. We're working towards that, and I certainly think that as business we're more than willing to come into the space, partner with government and policymakers to ensure that we build efficiency in our operations across the continent.
Who needs to sit at that table?
I think policymakers are critically important because they're the ones that need to shape the policies that come out of the discussions that they have. Business is critically important. Gone are the days where there is an ideological barrier between business and policymakers. And healthcare practitioners. Healthcare practitioners are incredibly important. We're doing phenomenal work here in Botswana in getting, the best quality oncology medicines available in the public sector. And the reason we're able to do that is that conversation was catalyzed by a healthcare practitioner. And then most importantly in the healthcare space, patients. Often we have these conversations amongst ourselves, it's like a little echo chamber, and we forget about the patient at the end of the day. That's why we do what we do.
Thank you so much for your time. Looking forward to see what else is going to come out from this session.
Thank you for inviting me.
That's it for today's episode, and until next time, goodbye.